Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show.
It may well possess a rudimentary intelligence.
I'm trying to think, but nothing happens.
Felt a great disturbance in the force.
Hello, I'm Mr. Red.
Come on, Mark, like a job for me.
Where's the goodies?
Leave the gun. Take the cannoli.
I bet you wouldn't have done anything like this if Mom and Dad were here.
You filthy criminal.
Excuse me while I whip this out.
Go ahead. Make my day.
Here are your hosts, Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
One bit where I'm leaving the house and I don't want to spoil it. You've probably seen it before, but I don't want to spoil it. But I'm sort of saying, I don't need anything. I don't need you. All that stuff came from my act. But largely the screenplay was developed by Michael Elias and Carl Gottlieb and myself, and we just kept working on it and working on it. Our goal was to have a laugh on every page. I hope you enjoy it, and here it is, The Jerk.
Well, I'm a jerk, but I don't know if I'm the jerk. Welcome to Everything Old is New Again here. And unfortunately, David Cohen can't be with us right now. But we have a very special guest. That, if you didn't know, was Steve Martin talking about his movie, The Jerk. And we have the gentleman that was mentioned in that clip. Michael Elias is with us today. He studied in the beginning, way back when, we should say, at Lee Strasberg's The Actors Studio and more. He was in theater in New York City. And then the 60s. He joined Frank Shaw and formed Elias and Shaw, a comedy team that appeared on The Tonight Show a few times in the late 60s, first in 1967, and then, of course, they played clubs all over New York City. He began writing for television and movies, including, but not limited to, The Glenn Campbell Show, the movie Frisco Kid, starring Gene Wilder and Harrison Ford. In 1971, he was a staff writer for the Pat Paulson comedy show with Steve Martin. And later, he collaborated with Steve Martin on his comedy albums, which were a smash in the late 70s. I remember those days, and 2 comedy specials on television, culminating in the screenplay The Jerk in 1979. But that wasn't it. In 78, he created and went forward with a hit TV sitcom that I'm sure you remember, Head of the Class. He created that, and it starred Howard Hessman, if you remember, wrote 15 episodes, I believe, for that show as well. Wrote screenplays for The Young Doctors in Love, School, Back to School, and more. In 1992, he wrote and directed the award-winning Showtime movie, taking place in the world of jazz. In that film, Jeff Goldblum and Forrest Whitaker starred, Lush Life. He has done so much more. But we need to leave some time for our interview here. So today, Everything Old is New Again. We'll join Michael Elias to talk about his latest work, the novel You Can Go Home Now, an addictive psychological thriller featuring a female cop on the hunt for a killer while battling violent secrets of her own. Welcome to Everything Old is New Again, Michael Elias.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
How does it feel to have your life encapsulated in a 2-minute introduction like that?
You did a good job. It was all coming back to me.
Life flashes before your eyes here on Everything Old is New Again.
Yeah.
Now, you've written comedy. You've obviously, we'll talk about that. We've written drama. You've written for the theater. You've written for television, for movies. Now you're on your second novel. To me, we've interviewed many people, and in life in general, we look at people get pigeonholed into I'm a comedy writer, or I'm a screenwriter, or I'm a talk show host, or a police officer, or whatever. And we think of people as just doing and be able to do one thing. Obviously, all that is writing, but it's different genres and different challenges, I presume. Do you feel that it was something within you, like a Renaissance man, so to speak, that you could do all of these different kinds of writing, or is writing to you?
It's very nice. I hope a Renaissance man. I like that. I think that for me, writing is writing what interests me. So I refuse to be pigeonholed or put into a genre because, say as a reader, I like to read comedy. I mean, I like to read Mark Twain, S.J. Corman. I like to read science fiction, Robert Silverberg. I like to read classic literature. So I like everything. And when it comes time to write, I refuse, or I don't want to be bound by, I can only write this and I can only write that. So, as I said, I write what interests me, and that, I think that comes out of my lifelong reading. And I say, okay, that a spy novel. Gee, I'd like to write a spy novel because I just read Le Carré. See if I can do that. I haven't yet, but that's kind of okay. That's the deal.
And it's a challenge to change things up, too. I mean, I can only imagine myself doing the same thing over and over again and every week on the radio. And you know, after a while, it becomes rote, and I'm sure you just you sort of go into a routine. And it looks like your career is like that, too. You've been in many different things, many different avenues we'll talk about. I think it's a good lesson, I guess, for the younger, or any of us that are listening, that, you know what, do what you like, and then success, I hope, would follow if you have some modicum of talent for what it is that you like, I guess. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, sure. And also I will also say in television changed while I was in it. So I began writing comedy shows and variety shows that you mentioned, Glenn Campbell and some others, specials and, you know, the variety shows, but they went out. They disappeared. So I can't be a variety show writer after that because there are no more. So you move on. And the same thing happened in sitcoms, where all of a sudden sitcoms changed, and you had sitcoms that were based really on character, not on pay the $2, pay the ticket, or Lucy, you know, domestic comedies. You had all of a sudden you had All in the Family. Well, and then Mary Tyler Moore, and then Rhoda, and so you better adapt. I mean, Hollywood in a sense is Darwinian, so you evolve, adapt, or die. And there were a lot of people left behind because all they could do were jokes, and they were really good at it, and they were great, or all they could do was, you know,
the drama, or whatever.
I'm not saying, you know what I'm saying. So, you had to change, and maybe I came to the end. In a sense, I said, I don't know, or it doesn't interest me anymore, sitcoms. It doesn't interest me anymore, after Head of the Class. I've done it, you know, I did it for 5 years. I don't want to do 3 camera, and I also want to express myself and write not only what I want to write, but I want to write and not have anybody tell me what to write. And that's part of the deal in Hollywood. You sell it, somebody else owns it. And that's just the way it is. Network executives, directors, movie stars, as a screenwriter, they can tell you what to do.
Sure, and in essence, in some ways, when and I don't know if this is your joke or your routine, but just using it as an example, when if you're at a party and you want to say "Let's get small," I presume if you wrote that for Steve Martin and he performed it, you really, in theory, you wouldn't be able to even do that, correct?
No.
Right.
No, I wouldn't anyway. And
right, but I'm just saying, if it's an example of boy, you know what, we'll get into that, but what you created and helped co-create with him, as just an example, that's now work for hire. That's what people understand is that's now owns that, and you paid for it, but you know, it's an odd profession in a way that you can't kind of brag about your own work, you know, in some ways that you're not able to do that. Does that, I guess, drive you a little bit, or maybe it did drive you towards writing You Can Go Home Now, I guess? Yeah,
or you want to write a novel, you want to write a play, you want to write something where somebody, and I will tell you an example that I wrote a play, and Paul Mazursky directed it. Ran for 4 months in Los Angeles. It's a play, semi-autobiographical, about a small Catskill hotel during the McCarthy period that catered to blacklisted writers and artists and so. Okay, so at one point during rehearsals, Mazursky, who's one of the great apes of television, of screenplays and directing, a director says to me, "I don't like the ending. I want you to change the ending of the play." And I said, "Well, what don't you like?" And he told me, I don't remember what it was. He said, "So change it." And I said, "No." And he looked at me, and there was a moment, and I knew, and he knew, if this was a screenplay and I was the screenwriter and he was the director, he would say, "Change it, or we're firing you. And I will change it, or I'll hire somebody to come in and change it." But because it was a play, he couldn't tell me to do that. And I said, "No, I'm not changing it." He said, "Well, you'll have to find somebody else to direct your play." And I said, "Well, I will."
Right.
The day went on, and I didn't change it. And it was a great feeling because it was, and I took the responsibility. If the audience doesn't like the ending, whatever. But still, I had that authority as a playwright. I wouldn't have it as a TV writer. I wouldn't have it as a screenwriter. I'd be out on my butt on Westwood Boulevard, Burbank Boulevard.
Exactly.
And it has happened. So that's part of why I think sometimes or for me, why I don't want to say evolved, why I left television and to do my own thing. And nowhere more can you do your own thing is in writing a novel.
Which we will, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we're going to be right back right after this and Everything Old's New Again, and we'll talk about You Can Go Home Now by Michael Elias. We'll be back right after this and Everything Old's New Again.
Although we're apart, you're part of my heart.
Now, back to America's entertainment pop culture talk show. Everything Old is New Again, with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
Well, it's knowing that your door is always open and your path is free to walk. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Glenn Campbell. And the people we have with us tonight are Miss Bobby Gentry and our own Pat Paulson. Jack Burns is with us tonight. Special guest stars, very hip Smothers Brothers are here.
And the very hip David Cohen is in New York City hanging out. He can't make it with us today, but that's okay, because we have a very special guest. If you've been listening to our show already, we've invited Michael Elias to be with us, and we're having a great time talking about all things comedy writing, drama, and the latest, You Can Go Home Now, a novel by Michael Elias. He worked with Steve Martin. So let's hear what Steve Martin has to say about this work, this book, You Can Go Home Now. Elias is so conversant with the mindset of criminals, cops, and trigger pullers. It makes me wonder about his personal life. This is a compelling thriller that has the rarest qualities. What's going to happen next? That from Steve Martin, and I'll tell you, maybe we can pivot a little bit. Tell me, because we're talking about you writing and you're doing many different kinds of things and have done in your life and your career. What is it about the topic and the novel itself, that this particular novel, that inspired you, the idea of it, that you really wanted to run with this and put your time and efforts into making this novel, You Can Go Home Now?
Well, You Can Go Home Now is a story about a woman a young female police detective in Queens who's handed cold case files of men who have been murdered. And she has to solve these murders. And she finds out that they all have something in common. They're widows. At the time these men were murdered, were in a battered women's shelter at the time the men were murdered. And she goes undercover into the shelter to find out if there's a connection between this women's shelter and the deaths and murders of these violent and abusive men. She has her own dark background, or tragic background, in that her father was a doctor in upstate New York who was assassinated by an anti-abortion terrorist, and she is determined to find him. And this happened when she was a teenager, and she joins the police force not primarily to become a cop, but to find out better ways to find out who this guy is. And those two stories come together. I would say there were two things that inspired me, but two things that motivated me. One is an examination of revenge and our American fascination with it. Clint Eastwood never delivers a villain, to a trial. He throws him out the window or shoots him in the heart. And we love that in our popular culture, revenge. We want the bad guys to die, and sometimes we want them to die as horribly as possible. Yet at the same time, we know that's antisocial. We're taught to reject that, and rightly so. We can't become a nation of vigilantes. However, we still love it. So I'm interested in that. And then at the same time, maybe the beginnings of the Me Too movement, or more of an awareness of the violence done to women, wives, mothers, and their children. I started thinking about that. And decided to put those two things together. So I could only tell the story, I felt, from a woman's point of view. So I had to write it as a woman, and I had to write it in the first person as a woman, because that's the only way I could really reflect and keep her anger alive and present on every page. And I hope I was successful.
Well, fellow author Jessica Blau indicates and takes off from what you just said and says that you write like a woman, like a woman. You write a woman like a woman, and you write a police thriller like a former cop. Now, of course, you're not a woman. I don't think you're a former cop. How does a writer get into the head of people that we can say are at arm distance with you, at least in commonality? How do you do you research? Do you use your imagination, your life experience, all of the above, some of the above? How do you get into and write as a woman, let's say, for an example?
I think I've written a lot of women in my life, in television and movies and so forth. And as a matter of fact, in Lush Life, somebody said, which of the characters, Jeff Goldblum or Forrest Whitaker, which mostly reflects you and your experience, these two jazz musicians? And I said, well, actually, it's Jeff Goldblum's wife, who was a school teacher in the movie, and I was. So I could relate to her more and told that was my thing. But as I just wrote it, and along the way, I said, the only test is, did I get it right? And I showed the book to friends, women friends, and my wife, and said, did I get it right here? And sometimes they say no, and they kick my butt, and they said, no, you didn't. This is terrible. And I fixed it, and I hope I got it right. And as far as the stuff about being a cop or research, I'm a kind of believer in first make it up and then find out if it's true. So I, like you, we've watched, and you listened, we watched and read hundreds of police thrillers, cop shows, from, whatever they are. We've seen them. So we kind of know what it's like to be a cop because we've seen it on television, read it in books. And so I just took from I think sometimes I just take stuff from my memory. Not that and so research is not a big deal. What research comes in handy for me is if I want my character to order pizza in Queens, I can go on, I can Google pizza places in Queens and see the menu.
Right.
And add the name of that pizza parlor, the pie, how much it costs, and so forth. And that gives a kind of veracity, and that's fantastic, I think.
Right. You really have the ability to research the background of these stories right from your office and wherever you are. It is amazing. Yeah. It's tremendous. And I think what you're saying also, and I hear that, is that all of us in life, just backing off from the particular of writing a novel, but what you're saying is important. I think that if we listen and are open-minded to learn about what we're doing and not think that everything we're doing is right just because we're doing it, you may actually learn something in life and widen your horizons a little bit, right? I mean, that's important to me.
Absolutely. Yeah,
so that makes sense. And along those lines, I just want to go back a little bit because we have to touch upon some of what you've done early in your life in television. You wrote for All in the Family an episode. You wrote for Mary Tyler Moore, Love American Style. Odd Couple favorites of this show and our fans. The Odd Couple episode was the new car with John Biner when they win a car and they they can't find a place to park it in New York City. I don't know how much of imagination you actually had to have for that one. In that, and that's what I guess great comedy is that you reflected back almost what everyone sort of, maybe a little more grandiose, a little more exaggerated, but what everyone goes through or went through at the time in New York City when you owned a car.
Yeah, I owned a car when I was, at one point I owned just this clunker, but I owned a car in New York City, which meant I had to get up. You remember, I don't know if they still do it, and move to the other side of the street and go back to bed. Owning a car in New York could be a curse and a blessing, and so sure, I remember that. That was really a big part of my life.
Yeah, they had that. I think it's Odd and Even Days or something of that nature.
Yeah,
where you switch the car to different sides of the street. Seinfeld did an episode on that.
You're competing with everybody on the block to find it was a horror show.
Right, at like 9:01, everyone's, or maybe 9:01. Everyone's just in that car trying to change their license.
If I wanted to park it, in a garage, I was living on the Lower East Side, so there were parking garages where more expensive than the rental on my apartment.
Now, I don't know. When you write, like in that particular situation, from what I understand, you wrote one episode for the show and weren't necessarily a staff writer. So after you write that one episode, do you stick around and watch the way it's performed? Do they want your opinions, or they just have to say thanks, good night, goodbye?
No, that was a different time. There was a time of freelancers. So a show you had an idea for an episode of whatever it was, and your agent would get you a meeting with, they weren't even called producers, they were story editors. So you go in and you talk to the story editor and say, okay, Mary Tyler Moore, what was it, Lou is going to chase down a story and return to the glory days of his own journey. Okay, and they said, that's pretty good. Come back, we like that. Maybe you pitched 2 or 3. Come back with an outline. Okay, come back with an outline. They say, yeah, we like this. Okay, go away, write a first draft. You come back, you write a first draft. You show them a first draft. They say, this is terrific. Sometimes they would say, write a second, or sometimes they would say, thank you very much, we'll take it from here. And you moved on, and you went back to rewriting your All in the Family. You're writing so you could do, sometimes if you got really good at a show, they would give you 2 or 3, a commitment for 2 or 3. Gradually, that system went away, and you started, and producers, showrunners started hiring staffs of writers to in-house write the shows and rewrite them all in the same. And then that evolved into the so-called writer's room, which they have now. But it was possible. I mean, before then, you could write 2 Lucys, you could write a My Mother the Car, you could write whatever it was, and you can make a living. You could make a really good living because you got reruns. That was the way of life, but that's gone.
Right, and you would provide different voices, different points of view for those characters. We'll be back right after this and Everything Old is New again, talking to Michael Elias, author of You Can Go Home Now. And I'll tell you, it's a great book, a great read. It's getting tremendous reviews. Amazon.com, anywhere you buy books. You Can Go Home Now, Michael Elias, Elias. We'll be back right after this and Everything Old's New again. Listen to Glenn Campbell on the way out.
Step in my face, slander my name all over the place.
Hi, I'm John Billingsley, and I help run the Hollywood Food Coalition. We serve a hot, nutritious 5-course meal to hungry men, women, and children 7 nights a week, 365 days a year. We distribute clothing, shoes, blankets, backpacks, you name it. We help people access a huge array of other services from partner groups. Please join us by making a donation to the Hollywood Food Coalition through our website, hofoco.org, hofoco.org. $3 buys a hungry person a great 5-course meal.
You're listening to Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
Hi, this is screenwriter and author Carl Gottlieb, enjoying being on the air with Douglas Viviani and David S. Cohen on Everything Old is New Again.
There we go. That's Carl Gottlieb, author of Jaws, or the screenplay. Also, he was and shared a screenplay credit with our present guest on The Jerk with Steve Martin, Michael Elias. And I'll tell you, it's great to visit with these gentlemen who have performed, or I should say, created performances on the screen that are so memorable as The Jerk, Jaws, Steve Martin's stand-up routine, and so much more. We're back with Michael Elias. Have you been in touch with, and what kind of relationship do you have when it says on the screen that you share the screenplay credit with Steve Martin and Carl Gottlieb? Well, again, how did it work? Are you guys in the same room? Did you, how did that work?
I'll tell you very briefly. Here's what happened. Carl and Steve wrote the screenplay. They went to, it was originally set up it was supposed to be at Paramount, and Paramount turned it down and decided they said they didn't want to make it. Steve and his managers and producer, David Picker, anyway, they felt it needed a rewrite, and Carl was unavailable. Gottlieb was doing something else. Steve called me up because we knew each other from working on the Pat Paulson Half a Comedy Hour, and we were friends, and he says, you want to come and write this, rewrite this screenplay with me? And I said, you bet. And we did. And then it went to Universal. And then it was a question of, and Carl, as I said, Carl was unavailable. And then, so, we did a big rewrite, enough of a rewrite, to get me screenplay credit with with them, and thank God.
And then Carl Reiner came along too and put his 2 cents in. It's got to be you in some way as a writer. It's in your time at that time. It sounds to me like you had to kind of put your ego in the drawer all the time, because maybe Carl had certain ideas that he wanted, and then he left the project. You came in and changed his ideas. Then maybe Carl Reiner, I'm guessing, came in and put his 2 cents in. So, like, how do you deal with that kind of a thing when your written word, as you described earlier, can be changed whenever and however they like?
Yeah, I will just say it was always in good hands. So Carl Reiner he took that screenplay and he made it into a really funny, brilliant movie. And I don't think anybody could have done it as well. So, and the irony is that Carl Gottlieb was too busy to do the rewrite. When it came time to shoot the movie, I was too busy to show up on the set and be around, because I was starting to do Head of the Class, so I was gone. But I knew it was in good hands. And the same thing with Young Doctors in Love, where Gary Marshall applied his comedy genius to that and made it a really terrific and funny movie. And I won't mention, but I've been involved in some movies where directors haven't done that. And it was not in good hands, and that's the bad part. I can tell you also, the original director of The Jerk was supposed to be Mike Nichols, and we met with him, and he told us his plans for his version of The Jerk, and it was unanimous that he was not the right guy to direct it. So
that's interesting.
I mean, that's a little piece of screen history.
Yeah, and a man that has so many accolades and so many talents himself. Yeah. Everyone's not for everything. I mean, right. not every baseball team needs a power hitter, so to speak. I mean, everyone has their function. It's so interesting, and it's a great attitude that you have to be able to take your work or see your work that you've done and have it modified, and like I say, as long as it's in good hands, you can smile with it. And if it's not in good hands, you kind of, I'm sure you lose sleep here and there over that.
You bet.
Just making sure the check cleared, I guess, is the most important part in those circumstances when it's an unfortunate.
Do you know who Alan Smithy is?
No.
Alan Smithy is a pseudonym that directors put on a movie. I don't know if they can still do it, when they do not want their name associated with the movie, but the movie has to come out and has to have a director, so they put Alan Smithy. So if you ever see a film directed by Alan Smithy, it's not by it could be by Michael Ritchie or whoever, but it's
that's interesting. Yeah. I'm sorry.
Sometimes we writers take their names off movies and put pseudonyms on because they want the money. They want the residuals. They want the, the profits, whatever it is, but you do not want your name on the movie. So I did that with one. Okay.
And of course we'll ask you which one it is, and you'll say I can't tell you, so I understand that. But we will waste time. But that is so interesting. I'm going to Google that, and maybe we will actually, if there's enough of those that appear, we will show up and have a show about that. And the other thing that brings to mind is W.C. Fields did that. Or he wrote his comedy plays. I forget the name, but he used a synonym for all of the plays. I should say the movies, really, that he wrote.
You're right. And I can't remember it either. You're right.
Now I'm going to have to come back for that trivia question another day on Everything Old is New Again. But let's dive in a little more with Michael Elias. Michael, you had a relationship with Steve Martin, not just from The Jerk, but let's talk about that comedy album, that time in the late 70s when I think, I certainly remember myself, he took the world by storm with his silly comedy act that was so over the top silly with making balloon hats and an arrow through his head and all these silly things, but he was so endearing and the act was so unique that I think it really caught fire. How did you get involved with that, and what participation did you have in that whole phenomenon?
Probably not a huge part, I would say. But what happened was, as you mentioned, I was a comedian with Frank Shaw. We had a comedy team, and we were on the Carson Show, and we toured, and we opened for the Turtles. We opened for Ed Ames. We nightclubs, all that stuff. And when we came to Hollywood, and the reason how we came to Hollywood was a producer saw us on the Carson show and called up and said, "Who are your writers?" And we said, "We are." He said, "Well, would you like to come to Hollywood and be writers, comedy writers?" And we said, "Yeah, well, what about the act?" He said, "Not interested." So we gave up the act and we came to Hollywood. And one of the first shows we did was the Half a Comedy Hour with Pat Paulson. Steve Martin was a writer. We became friends. And he said, "I'm not going to be a writer on television too much longer. I'm going to be a comedian. That's what I really want to do. And if you have any material or if you want to write with me or for me, I'd love it." And I said, "Absolutely." So I started writing, just giving him stuff. Hey, Steve, here's a good idea, whatever. And then I started going to Aspen and spending a weekend with him, and we would write material. So that's how that evolved. That's how I became part of it. And then when he did his albums, some of the material on the albums was stuff that I had written with him, and that's how I'm a part of that. And then stuff in his act. I would tour with him. I would be on the bus and go from city to city and watch the shows and add material, take material out. That was
just an example, though, of the phenomenon. We'll move on in a moment, but I just wanted to touch upon it because you're on the, inside of that. My first concert, I believe, was 16 years old, 1978, Nassau Coliseum. Steve Martin in concert, a comedian, filling 18,000 seats, singing King Tut and performing. It was an amazing event for me and affecting me at 16 that I still remember that to this day.
I was there. I remember that night too. And I think Stevie Goodman was the opening act.
Yes.
And remember?
I do.
And he was a phenomenal guy, Stevie, because he had to come out, open for Steve Martin. He had to come out and have 18,000 people screaming, "We want Steve, we want Steve." And by the end of his set, he had them in the palm of his hand. It was and this guy had to work to get them, and he did it. It was an amazing experience. And the thing about Steve, he was the first kind of rock and roll comedian that he could fill an auditorium of 18,000 people. And I saw it night after night. But this didn't happen overnight. How this happened was Steve, all the time, was going to little comedy stores in college towns, and he would, little comedy venues, and he would play for 50 people. He would play for 100 people, and he did it over and over and over again. So by the time he kind of burst on the scene, as it were, he had millions of fans who wanted to see him live, and it was great. And I'll tell you, he opened his show with a little short, the Absent-Minded Waiter, which was a comedy short, 10 minutes, directed and written with Steve, but directed by Carl Gottlieb. So it was funny, and it's the only comedian, because the hardest thing for a comedian to do is to get your first laugh. Right. But Steve would show this short, the audience would be laughing, and he would come out on stage. So he got his first laugh without saying a word. And it was brilliant.
What a great idea. We're very innovative, and certainly you're a modest gentleman. I'm sure, were behind a lot of what we smiled at and enjoyed in that show and others. And now we should be reading, because honestly, this is something for the summer. It's perfect. You go out to the pool, you go out to the beach, whatever you're going to be here, it's social distanced, of course, but you can go home now. By Michael Elias, you're gonna get a suntan, and you make it a sunburn, because you're not gonna move. You're gonna be reading this book like crazy. Put the suntan lotion on before you open the pages of this book, because you're not gonna put this book down. It's really an engaging read. Amazon.com, anywhere you get books. You can go home now. We will be back right after this on Everything Old is New Again.
I don't need you. I don't need anything except this. This ashtray, and that's the only thing I need is this. I don't need this or this. This ashtray. This pen.
This is Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
Sometimes life plays out slightly out of tune.
I'm scared.
Forrest Whitaker, Jeff Goldblum, and Kathy Baker star in a Showtime original movie, Lush Life.
We're back here on Everything Old is New again with the author, director of Lush Life, Michael Elias. He certainly is someone to take notice of and enjoy his career. There's so much here to talk about, and I'll tell you, the culmination right now, if you want to say that, is You Can Go Home Now, a book by Michael Elias. You can get anywhere books are sold, and it's a page-turner. That movie sort of is great for almost any time because it's a relationship between two individuals of different races and different backgrounds and so forth, find jazz and something in common that they love with each other, so to speak, go through difficult times together, and I think was really something that is... Look, if you're looking for something now to watch, we're all, sort of housebound and looking for new entertainment because there's not a lot of new entertainment coming out now other than Everything Old is New again every week. You may want to go back and take a look at Lush Life. Am I explaining it correctly, Michael?
Perfectly. Yeah, it's a relationship between two jazz musicians, and they're also session players. They do everything. They play rock and roll. They play classical. They do Broadway shows. These are guys who are working musicians, and as they say, we're not great. We're merely excellent. And if it wasn't for us, there wouldn't be enough music to go around. So I wanted to do a movie about the relationship and also about music workers, as it were. And the other thing I wanted to do is a movie about jazz musicians that wasn't dark in the sense of drug addiction and so. Because to me, and I've been an actor, I've been a writer, a performer, a comedian. Nobody gets more pleasure out of what they're doing than musicians, I think. I think for them playing, whether it's in front of 1,000 people or 15 people.
And somewhat unsung, too, because they're part of an ensemble, and they may not, especially in the jazz world, get the fame and notoriety, but they're doing it in the local club or wherever because they love jazz is kind of like a conversation, speaking to each other through their instruments. And I think it's so interesting. And
that's a good way of putting it. Yeah. So anyway, that's why I did that.
So that's terrific. And then I did want to talk before we go any further about radio in general, because off the air we were talking a little bit how radio had some influence with you. It certainly had an influence with me. I loved radio growing up, but I missed the golden age. I listen to them now sometimes again to hear what radio was like when I wasn't around. And it kind of influences our show a little bit in that if we feel that the entertainment of the past should be honored as a foundation, as a pillar to the entertainment that we're enjoying today, and should be acknowledged and should not be overlooked. And it's something that I think is overlooked sometimes. So maybe we could shine a little bit of the flashlight through the eyes of Michael Elias as to how radio had an influence, if any, upon your career and your life.
Oh, I think it was enormously significant, and I bet if you talk to writers my age, they will tell you the same thing. Because what you had something that was coming at you, but required your imaginative participation. You had to see what they were talking about, and that energized you creatively. That whatever it was, you filled in the blank, and that was such great. In a way, it was like training to be a writer, to fill that in, and all you had was sound and dialogue. So my happiest moments were lying under the covers, my parents thinking I was asleep, with my little radio, listening to whatever it was, the Lone Ranger, The Shadow, Red Rider. For some reason, I loved that show, Duffy's Tavern, and Jack Benny, all that stuff. And when I came to Hollywood, and at one point, I worked on shows with, like, Jack Benny would be a guest, or there would be George Burns and Groucho Marx and all these people. And I said, they were my heroes, not from television, but from radio. Or meet writers and work with writers when I first came out they were my age now, but they were guys who had written for Benny. And I'll never forget Balzer and Perrin, who wrote Your Money or Your Life. When they said, the guy says to Benny, and there's a long pause, and he says, I'm thinking. And, anyway.
And we're talking about,
yeah,
I mean, you talk about things like that affect you, the little things that are the foundation of your life that, if you examine, if you take a look back, if you hear a clip here and there, there's old shows you can hear, you can almost place yourself back in that bed as a little kid if you put on YouTube and put on The Shadow and hear Orson Welles, saying, who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men, right? I mean, it's The Shadow, but it's just, and that's what we love. Sometimes in our show, we will take upon characters. We don't always do interviews. We'll juxtapose things. We'll do games. We'll do quizzes, and we'll just argue and have the arguments you love to have. And so our show is somewhat different, and that's what I love about this interview too. Is we're doing something different on the radio that I think if people would take a time to listen, you're not going to hear anywhere else. And maybe we should, because it's time to develop and experience more than just that. If you were to go on the Tonight Show, talk about this book, they would give you, 5 minutes, and you do the best you can, but you can't explore like we can explore here, which is something I really enjoy doing. So along those lines, let's talk about one other thing before I get back to this book is you can't ignore Head of the Class. You created this sitcom that lasted 5 years. Howard Hessman from WKRP in Cincinnati was the star and was highly successful. It put a smile on your face. For some reason, overlooked these days. Tell us a little bit about the creation of it, and/or why did you select Howard Hessman, who, by the way, if you remember back in the day, was a very popular character from WKRP in Cincinnati. I'm assuming that had something to do with it. But you're the creator. What were the thoughts behind this show and the creation of this show?
Well, co-creator with Rich Eustace, my partner. ABC, we had a meeting with creative executive at ABC. He said, we want to do a high school show. We said, that's very interesting. We would like to do a high school show, but let's do one where the kids are really smart. We didn't want to do Sweat Hogs. We didn't want to do, is that what they call Sweat?
Yes.
We wanted to do some, and I'm not saying it was easy, but I had been a high school, junior high school and high school teacher in New York City. That was my day job for many years, or I don't know, 6 years off and on. So I knew about urban or New York City schools. So we mined that, and we created this class, and of course, who was going to be the teacher? And we needed somebody like me who was an actor, and this was his day job. He was a substitute teacher, and he ends up staying. So that was the premise. And Howard, who better than Howard Hessman, who still had, and still does, I guess. He had that hip veneer. He was counterculture, and at the same time, he was a brilliant actor and a terrific comic actor. And the rest was easy. All you had to do was write it. So.
But it was very different and very interesting. The only thing that was kind of similar, and it's not really, but it's just that show with Michael J. Fox, in that the roles were reversed. Michael J. Fox was the conservative, and the parents were the hippies or the liberal.
Yeah.
And so you did the same with usually the teacher's the genius and teaching and imparting upon the students all of these words of wisdom. In this case, kind of the reverse. And I thought that was really a great turn. And if you get a chance to take a look at that, it was a fun show. 114 episodes.
I think it's coming back on HBO Max. They're developing a new version. But I look at it now once in a while, and I'm not saying it's ahead of its time, but it was interesting. We had interracial dating. We had shows about gun control. We had shows about, we had a show about, birth control. We had a lot. We took a lot of issues and put them in the classroom.
But it also gave kids role models that it was okay to be, and nerd's the wrong word, but okay to be smart, okay to have some intelligence, okay to want to learn, okay to want to admire, to have something up here as opposed to just throwing a baseball or, being the goof in the class and the sweat hog, like I say, someone that's just going for laughs or is just not interested in learning. I like that part of it. Hopefully did that.
It was a show that people always said is a show that kids could watch with their parents.
Exactly. Together. And there's very few of those.
Right. Yeah.
And now, You Can Go Home Now by Michael Elias is a thrilling, listen to this now, examination into the power of revenge. I had several gasp out loud moments while reading, fascinating characters, and a deep dive into the gruesomeness of domestic violence infuse this page-turner throughout. And there's a twist at the end, I love this, that you'll never see coming. That's from a review in The Perfect Fraud, Ellen LaCourte. You got to love getting reviews like that for this book, huh?
Oh, yeah.
That was tremendous. And if you go look for something to read this summer, whatever, and you should be reading this summer, there's very little entertainment out there, and reading should be part of your daily life anyway. Let's face it. Come on, it's the greatest thing in the world. The imagination. It's just the next step. Radio is the next step from reading in that we sort of read for you, if you will. But you're still using your imagination in the settings that are described so beautifully with the word picture, developed by experienced writer Michael Elias. We really enjoyed our time together, and thank you so much for being with us, Michael Elias. You can go home now. Just saying that in an odd way, but thank you so much, and thank you for coming with us.
Thank you.
All right, we'll be back here next week on Everything Old is New Again. Who knows what we're going to bring up to the table here on entertainment, pop culture, but it will be something interesting, exciting, thrilling. Who knows what it might be, but this week, you can go home now. Michael Elias, get that book. I'm telling you, you're going to enjoy it. We'll be back next week on Everything Old is New Again. You've been listening to Everything Old is New Again, America's pop culture entertainment talk show. Find us on the web at everythingoldisnewagain.biz. That's .biz.
See you next week. Same bat time, same bat station.